The space station hung in the dark of the dying star like a lone lantern in the night. Its walls were old, patched with steel from different ages, and its corridors always smelled faintly of fuel and recycled air. Travelers from many worlds came through every day, but no one came here to stay. The station was only a stop along trade routes, a place to refuel, repair, or waste time before moving on. At the heart of the station was a small cantina. It was not glamorous, not the kind of place rich merchants visited, but it was always full. There was music, soft and low, made by machines, and there were voices from 100 different throats speaking in many different tongues. The walls glowed with dim lights, shadows moved across the floor, and the air carried the smell of strange drinks. Behind the bar stood a man who seemed ordinary. His name was Rylan. He had dark hair beginning to gray at the temples, and his eyes were calm, almost unreadable. He polished glasses with steady hands and moved with the quiet patience of someone who had spent many years working with little notice. To most who came into the cantina, he was just the bartender, the human who poured drinks and stayed out of the way. Humans were rare out here. Their home world had fallen to alien control years ago, and most survivors were scattered. Other species often looked down on them. They thought humans were weak, fragile, and slow compared to stronger or smarter beings. On this station, the alien guards barely looked at Rylan. To them, he was nothing but a quiet worker in a corner of the galaxy. But Rylan did not mind. In fact, he preferred it that way. He wiped the counter and watched as a group of merchants argued over trade prices. He listened quietly when smugglers whispered about new routes. He smiled faintly when a tired traveler asked for water instead of ale. He seemed peaceful, almost invisible. That was how he liked it. No one knew that he once had another life, a life of fire and steel, a life where he was not just a man pouring drinks but someone whose name had been spoken in fear. The cantina doors slid open with a metallic hiss. A group of alien guards walked, in tall and heavy with armor. Their weapons hung at their sides and their eyes scanned the room. Everyone fell quiet for a moment, waiting to see if trouble would follow. But the guards only looked around and laughed among themselves. To them, this was nothing more than a place full of insignificant beings. One of the guards leaned on the counter. He looked at Rylan with bored eyes. "Water," he said simply. His voice was deep and cold. Rylan nodded and filled a cup without a word. He placed it gently on the counter. The guard took it, drank, and turned away without thanks. That was always the way. The guards ignored him. He was just the human bartender. As the night passed, the cantina grew louder. A trader from the Outer Rim told a story about pirates who had stolen a cargo ship. A pair of engineers argued about the cost of parts. Music shifted into a faster rhythm. Shadows swayed across the floor as more customers came in. Rylan moved among them calmly. He poured drinks, carried trays, and cleaned tables. He listened more than he spoke. His silence made people feel safe to talk, and in that silence he learned much about the station and the galaxy beyond. But he kept his own past locked deep inside, hidden behind his quiet eyes. Now and then, though, the past whispered to him. When he lifted a glass, he remembered lifting a weapon. When he heard the sharp laugh of a guard, he remembered the roar of battlefields. When he walked through the cantina after closing time, he felt again the weight of long marches across Earth's broken cities. But he pushed those memories away. He told himself they belonged to another life, another man. Here he was only Rylan the bartender. The night stretched on. The cantina grew crowded. Rylan noticed a young human boy sitting near the back, carrying cleaning tools. The boy was new, hired to sweep floors and wipe tables. He looked nervous, glancing often at the guards. Rylan gave him a small nod of reassurance, and the boy managed a shy smile before returning to work. Rylan saw himself in the boy, the same uncertainty, the same desire to remain unseen. Perhaps that was what being human had become in this galaxy, learning to survive quietly, unnoticed, in the shadows of stronger beings. Hours passed, and the station's clock chimed softly to mark the change in shift. Some customers left, others arrived. The guards moved through the cantina again, their armor clanking. They laughed loudly, mocking a trader who spilled his drink. One of them kicked over a chair just for amusement. No one stopped them. No one dared. Ryland's hands paused for only a heartbeat before he returned to wiping glasses. He did not raise his voice, did not glare at them, did not show anything in his face. But deep inside, something stirred. It was faint like the flicker of a forgotten flame, but it was there. He remembered a time when he had stood tall before men and women who looked to him for strength. He remembered giving orders in a voice that cut through fear. He remembered battles where defeat had seemed certain, yet he had refused to give in. But those days were gone, or so he told himself. A soft hum filled the cantina as a new ship docked at the station. More travelers entered, their boots echoing on the floor. Ryland watched them quietly. He moved among them with practiced ease, pouring drinks and setting plates. No one looked at him twice. He was just part of the furniture, part of the air, invisible. That was what made the guards' ignorance so easy. They looked at him and saw nothing. They never wondered why his steps were so steady, why his hands never shook, why his eyes seemed too sharp for a simple bartender. They never guessed that once, long ago, this same man had been the most feared warrior of Earth, the commander, who had fought until the skies burned and the cities fell. Now, he poured drinks. Now he stood quietly while others shouted. Now he let the galaxy believe he was nothing. But the night was long, and even the quietest man cannot hide forever. Ryland finished polishing the last glass and placed it on the shelf. He glanced once more at the young human boy sweeping near the corner. He thought of Earth, of the people scattered among the stars, of the stories that had been forgotten. He thought of how quickly others had dismissed them, as if humanity were already finished. And then he smiled to himself. Small, almost invisible, but real, because he knew a secret that the guards would never guess. Sometimes the quietest place hides the loudest echo. Sometimes the smallest flame burns the longest. And sometimes the man everyone ignores is the one who carries the fire of a world that refuses to die. Ryland set down his cloth, poured one last drink for a tired traveler, and looked around the cantina. The night was ending, but the story was only beginning. The cantina was never truly quiet. Even in the middle hours of the station's long nights, there were voices, footsteps, the faint hum of engines running deep in the walls. But some nights felt heavier than others, as if the very air carried, tension waiting to break. This was one of those nights. Ryland felt it the moment the doors opened and a group of alien raiders walked in. They were broad-shouldered and loud, wearing mismatched armor taken from battles long past. Their eyes burned with restless energy, and their laughter was too sharp. The cantina fell silent as they entered, for everyone recognized the look of trouble when it arrived. The raiders claimed a table near the center of the room. They slammed their weapons on the surface not because they needed to, but because they wanted to remind everyone that they had them. Traders shifted uneasily in their seats. The young human boy sweeping in the corner froze, his broom halfway, through emotion. The alien guards at the far end of the room noticed the disturbance. For a brief moment, their gaze flickered toward the raiders. Then, just as quickly, they turned away. The guards laughed among themselves and returned to their drinks. They had no interest in interfering. To them, this was nothing but entertainment. Ryland saw it all, but his face gave nothing away. He moved with steady steps, carrying a tray of drinks to a table of tired travelers. His eyes flicked once toward the raiders, then back to his work. He had learned long ago that sometimes the best way to stay safe was to seem invisible, but invisibility could not always last. The raiders began ordering drinks, loudly, rudely, demanding more than they could pay for. Ryland served them without complaint, his movements calm and practiced. He knew the type. He had seen men like them before, both human and alien. Loud on the surface, but often careless in their pride. As the night went on, the cantina grew tense. The music played, but few listened. Conversations became whispers. The young human boy kept glancing nervously at the raiders, his hands gripping the broom as if it were a weapon. Ryland gave him a quiet look, a subtle shake of the head. The boy lowered his eyes again. Then, as always, trouble came. One of the raiders noticed a small group of traders sitting nearby. They were simple folk, carrying goods from one star system to another. Tired, thin, not fighters. The raider's grin widened as he leaned across their table. "You carry valuables," he said in a voice that carried through the cantina. "Why hide them? Share a little, for our amusement." The traders looked away. One of them, an older man with silver hair, shook his head quickly. "We have nothing of worth," he said softly. The raider laughed, a harsh, echoing sound. He stood and grabbed the man's sleeve, yanking him forward. "You lie." Chairs scraped as the other traders rose to defend their companion. But before they could act, 2 more raiders surrounded them. The cantina filled with noise, shouts, gasps, the sound of tables being shoved aside. Still, the guards did nothing. They leaned back, watching with amused expressions. Ryland's hand tightened around the glass he was drying. His eyes flicked across the room, measuring distances, counting steps, noting every weapon and every angle. Old instincts stirred within him, sharp and alive. He told himself to remain calm, to remain silent. This was not his fight. Not anymore. But when the older trader cried out as a raider raised a blade, Ryland's choice was made. He moved. To the casual eye, it seemed sudden, almost accidental. One moment he was behind the bar, the next he was in the middle of the room. But his steps were precise, his movements exact. He reached the raider just as the blade came down. In one swift motion, Ryland caught the raider's wrist. His grip was firm but not cruel. With a twist and a push, the blade clattered harmlessly to the floor. The room froze. The raider snarled, but before he could react, Ryland shifted his weight. His other hand, holding nothing but a glass, struck against the raider's shoulder. The blow was not wild. It was controlled, targeted, using balance instead of strength. The raider stumbled back, shocked more by the speed than the force. Another raider lunged forward, raising a fist. Ryland moved sideways, letting the strike miss. His hand found a bar stool. With a smooth motion, he set it between them, pushing the raider off balance. The alien crashed into a table, sending cups and plates flying. Gasps spread through the cantina. Ryland did not press the attack. He did not raise his voice. He only stood tall, eyes calm, hands steady. "Enough," he said quietly. The raiders hesitated. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across their faces. This was no ordinary bartender. His movements were too exact, his actions too sure. The traders stepped back, staring at Ryland in disbelief. The young human boy in the corner dropped his broom, his mouth open. Even the guards, lazy and uncaring, shifted uneasily in their seats. The leader of the raiders snarled and stepped forward. "You think yourself strong, human?" Ryland did not answer. His silence was heavier than words. His eyes, steady and sharp, held the weight of something the raiders could not name. The leader paused, then laughed harshly. "Not worth it," he spat. He motioned to his men. "Come, we will find amusement elsewhere." One by one, the raiders gathered their weapons and left, muttering under their breath. The cantina remained silent long after the doors closed behind them. Only then did Ryland move again. He bent calmly, picked up the fallen blade and placed it gently on the counter. He turned back to the traders. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly. They shook their heads, still too stunned to speak. The young human boy ran forward, his eyes were wide with awe. "Sir," he whispered, How did you do that?" Ryland gave him a small smile, faint but kind. "Years of practice," he said simply, and then he returned to his work as if nothing had happened. He picked up broken cups, set chairs back in place, and wiped the counter. The music started again, hesitant at first, then louder. Slowly, conversations returned, but the whispers spread faster than the music. "The human bartender? Did you see? He moved like a trained fighter. No, faster, sharper, not just trained. Something else? Could he be one of them? One of the old warriors?" Ryland heard the whispers but paid them no mind. He poured another drink, cleaned another glass. His eyes were calm, his voice steady. But inside he knew something had changed. He had revealed too much. The guards left without speaking to him, but their silence was not the same as before. This time they walked out with stiff shoulders and uncertain glances. They would report what they had seen. They would ask questions. And questions, Rylan knew, had a way of finding answers. He stood alone behind the bar after closing time. The room empty except for him. He placed the glass on the shelf and looked out at the stars beyond the window. For years he had lived quietly, a shadow of what he once was. But shadows could not stay hidden forever. Tonight, he had acted. Tonight, the galaxy had seen a glimpse of the man he once had been, and tomorrow, the whispers would spread farther. Rylan sighed softly and closed his eyes. He had wanted peace. But perhaps peace was never meant for him. Perhaps the universe had other plans. The station always seemed to breathe with secrets. Its corridors hummed with engines and voices, but behind every word there were stories waiting to be uncovered. That night, after the fight in the cantina, a new story began to spread like smoke. It started with a whisper. The human bartender, he fought like no ordinary man. Then another whisper followed. Did you see his eyes? Calm, steady, like someone who has seen battles before. By morning, the whole station had heard the tale. Traders repeated it in docking bays. Mechanics spoke of it while repairing ships. Even smugglers, who rarely cared about rumors, carried the words from one corridor to another. The story grew larger with each telling. Some said he disarmed 3 raiders at once, others swore he fought barehanded against 10. None of them knew the truth. But the truth mattered less than the idea. The idea was simple and dangerous. A human who could fight like that still existed. For years, aliens had seen humans as weak and scattered, a race broken by defeat. They believed Earth's warriors were gone, their spirit crushed. But the rumor about Rylan cracked that belief. It reminded people that humans once stood tall, that their willpower had been something to fear. Rylan heard the whispers, of course. He kept to his work, serving drinks and cleaning tables, his expression calm. But inside he felt the shift. The quiet life he had built was no longer hidden. The galaxy had noticed him, even if only as a rumor. The alien guards came into the cantina more often now. They sat in corners watching him with sharp eyes. They did not laugh as freely as before. Sometimes one would try to test him, asking questions in mocking tones. You there, human? Where did you learn to move like that? Your kind cannot fight. Did someone train you? Rylan answered simply, never giving more than he had to. I worked in many places. You learn things. Or I was lucky. Anyone else could have done the same. But the guards were not satisfied. They sneered, but their sneers did not cover the unease in their eyes. They had seen something they could not explain, and that unsettled them. One evening, while Rylan was wiping the counter, an old smuggler entered the cantina. He was thin, his skin marked with scars, his clothes patched from long travel. His eyes, however, were sharp, and when they fell on Rylan, they widened. The smuggler moved closer, leaning against the counter. It has been a long time, he said, quietly. Rylan looked at him with calm eyes. Do I know you? The smuggler chuckled softly. Perhaps not. But I know you. Or rather, I knew of you. Years ago, before Earth fell, I watched a recording. A battle in the ruins of your great city. There was a man who led the defense. He fought when all others would have surrendered. His voice carried across the comms. His soldiers called him Commander Rylan. The cantina grew quiet. Those nearby leaned closer to listen. The smuggler's voice lowered, but the weight of his words filled the room. You are that man, aren't you? For a moment, Rylan said nothing. His hands continued to polish the glass, his face calm, his movements steady. Inside, however, memories stirred. The ruined city, the broken sky, the voices of soldiers who had followed him until the end. He placed the glass down and met the smuggler's eyes. That man is gone, he said softly. But the smuggler only smiled. Maybe. But the spirit is still here. I saw it when you stood against the raiders. The fire has not died. The words spread quickly. By the next day, more than half the station believed the bartender was once a commander of Earth's final war. Some laughed at the idea, saying it was only a story. But others believed, and belief was powerful. Among the humans scattered on the station, something began to change. For years they had walked with their heads lowered, afraid of drawing attention. But now they looked at Rylan differently. Some greeted him with respect. Others whispered his name with hope in their voices. The young human boy who worked in the cantina followed him with wide eyes, eager to learn. One evening, as the cantina was closing, the boy gathered the courage to ask, "Sir, is it true? Were you really a commander?" Rylan looked at him, silent for a long moment. Then he shook his head gently. "Do not believe everything you hear. I was only a man who tried to protect others. That is all." The boy's eyes shone. "But you did protect them. You protected the traitors. You protected me. That means something." Rylan sighed quietly. He had tried so hard to leave the past behind, yet it kept finding him. Perhaps, he thought, the past was not something one could ever truly escape. The station itself seemed to sense the tension. More guards patrolled the corridors. Officials asked questions in hushed tones. Some aliens grew wary of the humans, worried they might rise again if given a spark. Others, secretly tired of the guards' cruelty, felt a strange excitement at the idea of resistance. But Rylan wanted none of it. He closed the cantina one night and sat alone in the silence. The stars beyond the window burned faintly, distant and cold. He remembered the faces of his old soldiers, brave men and women who had stood beside him. He remembered their courage, their sacrifices, their faith in him. And he remembered the end. How Earth had fallen, how he had walked away into the shadows carrying only guilt and silence. Now the galaxy wanted to remember him as something more. A symbol, a warrior. But he was tired of war. Still, the whispers would not stop. They grew louder, reaching even those who had never stepped into the cantina. The story of the human bartender who fought like a warrior spread across ships, across stations, across trade routes. Some laughed, some doubted, but others believed. One night, as Rylan was locking the cantina door, the smuggler returned. "You cannot hide forever," the smuggler said softly. "The galaxy needs reminders. It needs to remember what humans were. You may wish to remain silent, but silence will not hold forever." Rylan looked at him, weary but calm. "Why me?" he asked. "There are others, stronger, younger. Why not them?" The smuggler smiled faintly. "Because you have already carried the fire once, and those who carry fire never truly let it go." Rylan said nothing. He turned away, his hand steady as he set the lock. But in his chest, the old flame stirred once more. He told himself he did not want it. He told himself he only wanted peace. But deep inside he knew the truth. The guards ignored him still, but now it was with unease rather than disdain. The humans watched him with hope. The smugglers watched him with curiosity. The station itself seemed to wait, holding its breath. And Rylan, standing alone in the dim light of the cantina, wondered how much longer he could pretend to be invisible. The past was not gone. The whispers of the past had become the voice of the present. And soon, he knew, they would call him to act once more. The space station felt different now. The walls were the same, the corridors still hummed with the same engines, and the cantina still smelled of old metal and strong drink. But beneath all of that, there was a new energy, a quiet tension, like a string pulled tight. It had begun with whispers about the human bartender. Now those whispers had grown into watchful eyes, careful questions, and silent hope. For the humans scattered on the station, life had always meant keeping their heads low. They worked the lowest jobs, ate the poorest food, and lived in the coldest rooms. They avoided the guards, avoided attention, avoided trouble. But after Rylan stood against the raiders, something shifted. Humans began walking a little taller. They greeted each other more openly. They even looked the guards in the eyes instead of lowering their gaze. The guards noticed, and they did not like it. One evening, Rylan was cleaning the bar when two guards entered. Their heavy boots struck the floor with purpose. The room grew, silent, every conversation cut short. The guards walked straight to the counter. "You," one said, pointing at Rylan. "We hear stories that you are more than a bartender, that you were once a warrior, a commander." Rylan looked at him calmly, his hand still polishing a glass. Stories grow larger each time they are told. The second guard leaned closer, his eyes narrow. You think you can frighten raiders and stir your kind to boldness? You think we will allow that? Rylan placed the glass gently on the shelf. His voice remained quiet. I think I serve drinks. Nothing more. The guards sneered, but they found no weakness in his tone, no fear in his eyes. One shoved the counter hard enough to rattle the glasses, but Rylan did not flinch. After a long moment, the guards left, though their laughter sounded forced. When the doors closed behind them, the cantina slowly returned to life, but many eyes lingered on Rylan with silent admiration. To stand calmly in front of armed guards, few would have dared. Later that night, the young human boy approached him as he swept the floor. They fear you, the boy whispered. Rylan shook his head. No. They fear what I remind them of. They fear what humans could be again if they stopped hiding. The boy's eyes were bright. Then maybe we should stop hiding. Rylan looked at him for a long moment. He wanted to say no, to remind the boy that rebellion brought suffering. He wanted to tell him that humans had already lost, that to rise again would bring only pain. But the boy's eyes held hope, and Rylan could not crush that hope. Instead, he said softly, Not yet. The tension grew in the following days. The guards began provoking him more directly. They came into the cantina and made trouble, knocking over drinks, insulting customers, pushing tables aside. At first, Rylan ignored them. He picked up what they knocked down. He calmed frightened customers. He cleaned the mess without complaint. But each night their actions grew bolder. And one night, they crossed the line. The young human boy was carrying a tray of empty cups when one guard stuck out his leg, tripping him. The tray crashed to the ground, cups scattering across the floor. The boy stumbled, landing hard on his hands. The guard laughed. Clumsy human. The cantina went silent. Every eye turned to the boy, then to Rylan. Rylan moved slowly, carefully. He stepped around the counter and helped the boy to his feet. Are you hurt? He asked softly. The boy shook his head, though his face was pale with fear. Rylan turned then, his calm eyes resting on the guards. His voice was steady, but it carried through the room. That was unnecessary. The guards laughed again. What will you do, bartender? Clean the floor? That is all your kind is good for. Something shifted in Rylan's expression. It was small, almost invisible, but those who watched closely felt it. The calm surface of a lake disturbed by the first ripple of a storm. He stepped forward. The first guard reached out, aiming to shove him. But before his hand touched, Rylan moved. His arm brushed the guards aside, his body turning with smooth precision. His hand found the guard's wrist and twisted, not harshly, not to break, but to guide. The guard stumbled forward, crashing into the counter. Gasps filled the room. The second guard swung at him. Rylan's movements were faster. He stepped sideways, letting the strike miss. His hand tapped the guard's shoulder, redirecting his balance. The guard stumbled, colliding with a table that toppled under his weight. Rylan stood still then, his eyes steady, his voice quiet but firm. No more. The cantina was frozen. The guards groaned on the floor, shocked more than harmed. Rylan had moved like water, fast, efficient, unstoppable. Not angry, not wild, only controlled. Every human in the room felt it. The fire they thought lost burned again before their eyes. The guards rose unsteadily. Their faces burned with humiliation. They glared at him but did not strike again. Instead, they staggered out, muttering promises of revenge. When the doors closed, silence held the room for several heartbeats. Then the humans in the cantina began to whisper, their voices filled with awe. He stood against them. He moved like no one else. He is one of the old warriors. The young boy looked at Rylan with wide eyes. You didn't just protect me. You protected all of us. Rylan sighed softly. He returned to the counter, his steps calm. I only did what was needed. But everyone in the cantina knew it was more than that. That night after the cantina was closed, Ryland sat alone at a table. The smuggler entered quietly and sat across from him. "You know what you have done," the smuggler said. Ryland rubbed a hand across his face. "I only wanted peace." The smuggler shook his head. "Peace is not given. It is made. Tonight, you gave humans something they have not had in years. Hope." Ryland's eyes were heavy with memory. "Hope can be dangerous. Hope can cost lives." "Hope can also save them," the smuggler replied. "You cannot hide what you are. You may call yourself a bartender, but your people see more. They see a leader." Ryland was silent for a long time. Then he said softly, "A leader leads into danger." The smuggler leaned forward. "And sometimes, into freedom." In the following days, Ryland noticed changes among the humans on the station. They gathered more often, speaking quietly in groups. They greeted each other with nods of respect. They walked straighter, their eyes brighter. One evening, a small group approached him after the cantina closed. "Teach us," they said simply. Ryland looked at them with weary eyes. "Teach you what?" "How to stand," one replied. "How to move like you did. How to protect ourselves." He wanted to refuse. He wanted to tell them it was foolish, that resistance would bring only suffering. But he looked at their faces, the determination in their eyes, the courage hidden beneath years of fear, and he remembered the young boy tripping under the guard's foot. At last he nodded. "Very well, but you must listen. You must learn patience before strength, calm before action. If you cannot master that, you will lose before you begin." The humans nodded eagerly, and so it began. Ryland started quietly, teaching them in the back rooms of the cantina. He showed them how to move with balance, how to avoid a strike instead of meeting it head-on, how to use calm thinking in place of anger. He told them again and again that survival was not about being stronger but about being smarter, faster, and steadier. The young boy learned quickly, his eyes bright with determination. Others followed, clumsy at first but slowly growing sharper. As the lessons spread, so did the whispers. More humans wanted to learn. The fire grew, small but steady. The guards still ignored the bartender, but not in the same way as before. Now, when they looked at him, unease tightened their faces. They sensed something was happening, though they could not yet see it. The station had not changed in its walls or machines, but the people inside felt different now. The humans walked with straighter backs, their steps lighter, their eyes brighter. They still worked the lowest jobs, still lived in the poorest quarters, but something had shifted deep inside them. They were no longer only survivors. They were waiting for something more, and all of it pointed back to one man, the quiet bartender named Ryland. He had never asked to be seen as a leader. He had never told anyone about his past. But each day, more humans came to him in secret. They asked for guidance, for training, for courage. And though he hesitated, though he told himself he wanted only peace, he could not turn them away. So, in the back rooms of the cantina, he began teaching. At first, he taught simple things: how to stand without fear, how to breathe steady when facing anger, how to move with balance and calm. Then he showed them how to use what they had. A broom could block a strike. A piece of wood could push aside a weapon. A glass or a chair could distract an enemy long enough to escape. He never spoke of open battles. He never promised victory. He only spoke of survival, of protection, of hope. But even small lessons became powerful. The young human boy learned fastest. His hands were still thin, his body small, but his eyes burned with determination. Ryland saw in him the same fire that once burned in the soldiers of Earth. When the boy moved, it was clumsy at first, but soon his steps grew sharp and certain. Others followed. Men and women who had once bowed their heads now lifted them high. They began to trust one another, to move together. They were not yet fighters, not yet soldiers, but they were no longer shadows. The guards noticed. They saw the change in the humans. They heard the rumors growing louder, the whispers spreading farther. They began questioning the bartender more, directly watching him with sharper eyes. One evening, 3 guards entered the cantina. Their faces were hard, their eyes narrow. They stood before Rylan at the counter. "You are teaching them," one accused. Rylan's hands moved calmly as he wiped the counter. His voice was quiet. "I teach them how to stand. Nothing more." The guard slammed his fist on the counter. "You are stirring rebellion." The room went silent. Humans and aliens alike watched, waiting. Rylan looked at the guard with steady eyes. "I am reminding them they are alive. That is not rebellion. That is truth." The guards muttered among themselves. But they did not strike him. They left with threats, promising punishment. The cantina remained silent long after they were gone. Then, slowly, the humans looked at Rylan with something deeper than respect. They looked at him with trust. That night, Rylan sat alone after closing. The smuggler entered once again, moving quietly to sit across from him. "They know who you are now," the smuggler said softly. "They may not know the full story, but they feel it. They feel the strength you carry." Rylan's eyes were tired. "Strength is not enough. I cannot lead them into another war." The smuggler leaned forward. "It may not be your choice. The galaxy moves whether we want it to or not. The question is whether you will stand aside or stand with your people." Rylan said nothing for a long time. His fingers tapped gently on the table, the rhythm steady, thoughtful. At last he whispered, "I once led, and they fell. I do not want to see that again." The smuggler's eyes softened. They fell because they were left alone. But now, they are not alone. Now, they have you. And sometimes, one man standing is enough to remind a whole people how to rise. In the days that followed, the humans grew bolder. They began meeting openly in groups, talking with voices that no longer shook. They cleaned their quarters together, shared food, repaired one another's tools. Small acts, simple acts, but each one was a step toward unity. The guards grew restless. They pushed harder, trying to frighten the humans back into silence. But each time they mocked, each time they shoved, the humans stood a little straighter. They no longer lowered their eyes. And always, they looked toward Rylan. One evening, as the cantina filled with travelers, the young boy asked Rylan a question in front of everyone. "Do you believe humans can rise again?" The room went still. All eyes turned to Rylan. He set down the glass he was cleaning. His eyes moved across the room, seeing the faces of men and women who carried both scars and hope. He saw the boy's bright eyes, the trader's weary gazes, the worker's silent trust. Slowly he spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the cantina. "Humans have always been told they are weak, that they are finished. But weakness is not the end. Weakness is where strength begins. We are still here. We breathe, we work, we endure. That is more powerful than any weapon. Yes, I believe we can rise again, not by pretending to be something we are not, but by remembering what we already are." The silence held for a heartbeat. Then the humans began to nod, their eyes shining. A murmur of agreement filled the cantina, growing louder, warmer. Rylan stood behind the bar, his hands steady, his eyes calm. For the first time in many years, he allowed himself to feel the fire inside him, the fire of a leader, the fire of a warrior. That night he dreamed of Earth. He dreamed of its cities, broken but beautiful, its oceans, its skies. He dreamed of the soldiers who had followed him to the end, their voices strong, their spirits unbroken. He dreamed of the promise he had made, that even if Earth fell, humanity would endure. When he woke, he knew the truth. The time for hiding was over. The guards tried once more to humiliate him. They stormed into the cantina, their voices loud, their steps heavy. They shouted that humans were nothing, that any sign of resistance would be crushed. But this time, the humans did not shrink. They did not look away. They stood together, their eyes steady. Rylan stepped forward, calm and tall. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise. "You ignored me once. You thought I was only a bartender, but now you see the truth. I am not only one man. I am the reminder of what humans are. And you cannot ignore us forever." The guards froze, unsettled. They muttered threats and left, but everyone in the room knew something had changed. The humans were no longer invisible. From that night on, Rylan continued teaching. Not in secret, not in shame, but openly. He showed them patience, discipline, courage. He reminded them that survival was not surrender. He was still a bartender. He still poured drinks, still polished glasses, still listened quietly to stories from travelers. But now every glass he placed on the counter, every word he spoke, carried weight, because he was not just the bartender. He was the man who had once led Earth's final defense. He was the warrior who had stood when all else fell, and, though he had tried to bury that past, it had risen again, not for his sake, but for the sake of his people. One night after the cantina closed, Rylan stood alone by the window. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the glass, cold and distant, yet full of promise. The young boy approached him quietly. "Do you think they will come for us?" Rylan nodded slowly. "Yes, they will. They will not allow this fire to grow without trying to put it out." The boy swallowed nervously. "And when they come?" Rylan turned to him, his eyes calm but burning with steady fire. "Then we will be ready." He looked once more at the stars. The past was behind him, but it was not gone. It lived in him, in the humans who now stood taller, in the hope that spread through the station like light through darkness. The galaxy had ignored the bartender, but now it would remember the warrior. The fire of humanity had been lit again, and this time, Rylan vowed, it would not go out.